Hi, everyone. Welcome to this IW Learn webinar on communications. We are excited to have you here. I'm here with two of my colleagues from GRID-Arendal. My name is Lisa Hymas, and I am a senior communications officer here. And we are going to be presenting a webinar today, getting the news out, writing, capturing, and sharing. So you can watch and listen along. You can also submit questions that we will try to address later on. You'll be able to type them into a box on your screen. If you don't want to have your name associated with it, you can click anonymous. Oh, the Q&A. Q&A is where you can submit those questions. So welcome. Here's a, oops. Here's a quick overview of what we're going to be covering today. I will be talking about how to write a compelling story. My colleague Rob, our audiovisual expert, will talk about capturing strong imagery to go with that story. And my colleague Kaya, our social media expert, will talk about how to spread your story and get attention for it. So when you start writing a story about your work, you should be thinking of yourself not as someone who is writing a report about a project, but rather as someone who has a great story to tell. You are a storyteller. For eons, people have been sitting around campfires and other places and telling each other stories. Stories are how we communicate important messages, how we make connections with other people, how we remember things. The best communicators are storytellers. We tend to remember a good story far longer than we remember a fact or a statistic. Stories can reach people emotionally in a way that resonates more than just when you reach them intellectually. So you're not just putting information into a document, you're crafting a narrative. One of the first things you need to be thinking about when you think about starting a story is, who is your audience? Who is this story for? And what is the story intended to do? That will affect how you write it. So I find that it can be helpful to have a specific reader in mind, the kind of person that I want to reach. So is this a story that you plan to share on Facebook and try to use to engage the general public? Or do you want to engage people in the community where you work? Or maybe you're writing for policymakers, or writing for colleagues or other people in your field? Or are you writing for funders? Every story should have an audience and a purpose, and you need to know that before you start writing. This is a graphic from a social media expert and storyteller whose name is Megan Golden, and I liked some of the words that she was using here to describe the kind of stories that we'll want to be going for. Your first task is to identify what a good story is to tell. Maybe you released a new report, but maybe that's not the best story that you have to tell. Or maybe you don't want to focus just on that report when you communicate about it. For example, maybe there's one aspect of a report that you can tell a story about that will create a more human connection or a more human story. You want to find a specific story about a good character, and you want to keep it focused and have a clear message or a narrative. Keep in mind a few key elements of a good story. It has a beginning, a middle, and an end. It has characters, and there's something that happens in it. There's some action or revelation or change. So let's talk about characters a little bit. Many of the best stories have a main character. So people engage more with stories that center around a character, a specific person who's involved rather than just a group or a project. So that character could be someone in a community affected by a project that you're working on, or it could be someone on your team who's working on the project. A main character gives your readers someone to relate to, someone to care about, someone to connect with. A character doesn't always have to be an individual. It could be a family. It could be two people who are working together to solve a problem, but it's better to focus more on individuals than to focus on a big group. So you'll want to share some details about your character. What's her name? Where does she live? Are there interesting things about her? What's important to her? And what's the problem or challenge that she's facing? And also, what does she have to say herself? It's good to include quotes from your main character. One classic way to tell a story is to introduce a main character who faces a challenge or a problem. And then you show how the work that you're doing or the project that you're engaging in helps them address that problem, or at least helps them to understand that problem and know how to start tackling it. A key part of the story for people working on community projects is solutions. What kinds of solutions are possible for problems in this community? And how are solutions being employed or tested? Also, I think it's important to note that it's okay if your group doesn't have everything figured out, if you haven't gotten the problem solved. Everyone on this webinar is working on really tough issues. They're not easy to fix. Your story can be about your effort to fix a problem. It can be about the path toward a solution, even if you haven't achieved that solution yet. And it can be okay to talk about the challenges that you have along the way. You haven't figured this problem out completely yet, but here's how you're working on it. Here's a key question that needs to be in your mind as you're writing a story. Why should a reader care? Why should a policymaker care? Why does this matter? And how does this story affect real people? Try to make your story interesting and engaging enough that people become emotionally connected or invested. I think this is an important guideline. You don't want to use too many numbers and statistics. You can use some facts and figures, but you don't necessarily want to make them the centerpiece of your story. You want to introduce your character and their situation, and then numbers can come into a story later to strengthen the message. So one way to think about it is, this is the story, and then here are the numbers that back the story up. Maybe you have a story about how one man was confronted by a problem, and later in the story, you can share statistics about how many other people are confronted by the same problem. So this is an example of a story that I think was really crafted in a smart way. It's about a report published in an International Monetary Fund journal about how much whales are worth monetarily if you consider the ecosystem services they provide. So it's really a story about a report and a story about numbers, but you'll see right in the second sentence that the author focuses on a person. So he says, a great whale is worth $2 million. The size of that number so terrified Ralph Chamey, the economist who apprised the whales, that he sought refuge in a church for the first time in 30 years. So what this writer did, instead of just writing about the report, was he talked to the author of the report and he got that author's story. And I think this is a really compelling way to craft a story. So, next week, I'm probably not going to remember, was the great whale worth $1 million? Was it worth $2 million? But I will remember that anecdote. I will remember that the researcher was so freaked out about what he found that it drove him into a church, something that he wouldn't normally do, and to have a conversation with his maker. So those are the kind of stories that are golden if you can track those down. I liked this short list. It's from a group called the Ridgespan Group, which advises NGOs and nonprofits. Just some quick basic rules of good storytelling. So name your protagonist. That's essentially choose your character. Fix him or her in time or space. So that means tell us about them. Who are they? What's their situation? And then you find them, they have an inciting incident, something that throws his or her world out of balance, or that would be a problem. And you describe the barriers that they're running into. And then you describe them achieving that goal or what they learned along the way. This is a good basic outline that can be applied to a lot of different kinds of stories. One part of your process will be talking to people. So reach out to people affected by your project or people involved in your project and ask them a lot of questions and then listen to what they have to say. Oftentimes you may have been working on a project for a long time, but going through this process of asking people their impressions, you can find whole new stories and anecdotes that you didn't know about that can help make your case stronger. You don't want to include everything that people say. You're keeping your ears open for a good anecdote and for one or two good short quotes. Overall, you really want to use simple, clear, straightforward language. You want to stay focused on a certain thing. You don't want to include too much detail or too much information into one story. And one key part of that, of keeping it simple, is saying no to acronyms. It's easy for those of us who get deep down and involved in a project to get caught up in jargon and acronyms that a normal person or anyone who doesn't work on this stuff day to day just isn't going to know. So just leave them out of your story. Just try not to use them at all. This is one trick that's used by a lot of professional writers while they're writing a story. Take a moment to read your draft out loud to yourself. This helps you know if your story flows well, helps you know if there are awkward phrases that are hard to say. That means they're probably going to be hard to read too. It'll help you pinpoint sentences that are just too long. It's an easy trick. So I want to talk really briefly about headlines. This headline could use some improvement. You've got a bunch of acronyms. There's no sign of any human touch here. A normal person is going to glance at that and have no idea what it's talking about. You want to be looking for headlines that are more catchy and interesting, that are going to grab people. So I have just a few examples from a nonprofit called Charity Water that has been lauded a lot by storytelling professionals for doing a good job. I think these headlines from its website, for stories on its website, are pretty great. So there's a quote, "I feel beautiful for the first time." So they found a woman whose quality of life was really improved by having access to clean water. And she's talking about how it affected her personally. Or Carolina and Tabia's walk for water. So you know you have a couple characters, you're going to follow them along on a story during their day. You're going to get to know them, draws you in more. I also liked the clinic that had almost everything, because it makes me wonder, what's the one thing that it didn't have? And I want to read on and I find out what the story is that they're telling. The last point that I want to make is that nobody can write a story by themselves. Have your coworkers read your story and give you feedback on it. I've been working in communications for a long time, and I never put anything out into the world without having other people read it. I want to get their perspectives. I want to have them help me hone my message. Did I miss something important? Did I misspell someone's name? Is that part confusing? You always want to get more feedback. And at that, I'm going to hand it off to my colleague, Rob, and he is going to talk to us about how important it is to have strong images to go with your story. That's another key part.
Oh, I was going to try and do a fancy thing there with a video, but I just decided just to step over instead. Hello, everyone. Good to see you here. My name is Rob Barnes. I'm a digital communications expert here at GRID-Arendal. And the next few minutes, we'll go over the capturing the imagery. And I know a lot of you there are from IWLearn and Jeff International Waters projects. So you'll be interested on how to capture imagery for your projects. So what I'm going to be going over is a few simple tips and tricks on how to take a good photo in the three kind of styles, and then looking at taking some photo and video with your phone. So when you're looking at the three kind of photos, you're always looking at landscape photos, portrait photos, and detailed photos. Here are my top tips for the landscape shots. Always try and have a straight horizon. That means holding your phone straight and having the horizon straight in the background, or using some kind of tripod. You want to try and lead people's eyes into the photo. Try and layer the photo as much as possible. Fill the photo. Try not to have a lot of empty space in your photo. And always think about how naturally people read from left to right. They also naturally look at photos as well from left to right. And then think about your depth of field. I know a lot of very expensive cameras, you can do depth of field very easily, but nowadays with phone cameras as well, you can think about depth of field and focus on a specific item in your photo and have some of it blurred out. And always think about nice lighting. The best time to take a photo for landscape shots is either early in the morning or just at sunrise or just at sunset. This is called the golden hour. There is one more key issue, which I'll cover after the next few slides. Let's look at the tips for portrait shots. It's always in the eyes. if you're taking a picture of somebody, just focus, make sure the eyes are in focus, and then everything else will come out in focus naturally. As long as the eyes are in focus, the photo will look good. Think about depth of field. One way to make your portrait really pop is to have the person in focus and the background blurry. When I say invest in good glass, I'm thinking about SLR cameras and digital cameras. Then if you think about lenses, you get what you pay for, I'm afraid to say. The more money you invest in your lenses, the better the photos will be. And the same goes with your cameras. Although that's always not the one thing you can think of, but if possible, try and get a good camera. When you're taking a portrait shot of somebody, try and relax your subject. You'll get a much better photo if the subject is relaxed and happy, and try not to do very quick photos. Take your time. It's usually you're working with digital photography, and it doesn't matter if you take 20 photos and only use one of them. Try and get them in a nice pose. I'm sorry to say, but people do have a good side and a bad side. When they're looking at the camera, sometimes straight on is not their best feature. Have them to the side, have their arms crossed, tilt their head, look down. There's many things you can do to make the portrait photo seem more interesting. And that goes well with creative composition. You can move people around, and again, I will talk about the composition of the photo in the next couple of slides. And again, same with the landscape shot, try and have a straight horizon. Even if someone can be leaning, but the background is leaning as well, then it's obvious that the camera's off. Don't put the subject in the dead center of your photo. It's a much more interesting shot, especially if there's a nice background, is to have the background there as well and the person to one side. Try and put the sun in front of your subject, not behind them. Unless you're taking a photo at sunrise or sunset, it's extremely hard to take a photo with the sun in the photo. And again, get nice lighting. If you're shooting outside, the easiest way to make someone look incredibly beautiful is to take a photo at sunrise or sunset. And now let's think about detailed shots. Sharp focus is essential. If you're taking a photo of, sometimes you need to take a photo of a report or somebody's hands holding something you've made, or details of a computer or something like that, make sure the sharp focus is essential. But if your camera can blur out the background, then do it. Your item will always come out much better if the background is blurred and the item is in clear focus. But then saying that, don't clutter the photo. If you want a photo of one thing on your desk, or if you're taking a photo of food or something like that, then don't fill the table with lots of things. Don't clutter your photo. And again, get nice lighting. So they were very, very quickly, I just went over some of the do's and don'ts for taking the 3 styles of photos. And then when we're looking at your project photos and your meeting photos, these are the top tips that I would recommend. It's the rule of thirds. When you're thinking about the rule of thirds, it's dividing the camera, the picture the camera takes into 3. As you can see here on the screen, it's across. It doesn't come out very well on this screen, but it's divided in 3s. And then when you take your photo, you use the crosshairs here and here to make something interesting. It makes a much more interesting, elegant photo. And you can do this when you're taking a photo of something in the background, but also with the background itself. You can see I've targeted the background here. And it's much more prominent here. You can see that the dog is using the target here, and it makes a much more interesting photo. But then saying that, rules are there to be broken as well. You can always again lead people into the photo, so you bringing people in, but again, it's not cluttering. And here's another example of how you can lead somebody into a fantastic photo. One of the most common compositional mistakes is to leave too much empty space in the scene. You can see here, this may be classed as empty space, but because it's got such nice coloring on the clouds, then it's not. Something is going on everywhere in the picture. But when you're doing landscapes, you've got to make sure everything's in focus. If you are using a digital camera, or an SLR or anything that's beyond a lower end mobile phone, I would always to recommend to shoot in RAW. Shooting in RAW will give you many more options to edit the photo after, because then you can pull up the shadows and you can pull down the brightness. So for those times where you didn't have time to compose your shot quickly, if you're at a news event, or if you're at a launch event, or if you're just in a meeting, something like that, sometimes you don't have time to position people or get the lighting right. So if you just shoot in RAW, it gives you much more options to be able to pull up those shadows, pull down the lights, and there'll be less blur and less distortion in the photo. Now let's look at my top 5 tips for photography with your phone. Try and keep your phone clean as much as possible. Your phone lives in your handbag, lives in your pocket. It's going to get dust, it's going to get dirt, it's going to get scratches on it. Try and keep it in a case. Try and keep the camera clean. When you're bringing out the camera, try and clean it with a piece of cloth or your jumper, anything you can do to keep that clean. It will help your photo. Turn on the grid or the guides. As I said, the rule of thirds is very important, and it's very, very easy if you turn on the grid or the guide setting on the phone. It goes into your settings. It's not always easy to get to, but there is a setting to turn on these grids so you can see them on your screen, and makes it much easier for targeting your photos. One of my enormous pet peeves for taking photos and also videos is making sure that the phone is always on the side. The reason is it's not just to produce a nice landscape photo, but also it's to talk about this. It's the sensor in phones. The sensor in phones is that to make 100% use of the sensor in the phone has to be on the side. If you have the phone up in a portrait mode, you're only making use of a small part of the sensor, so you're not going to get the full image that you need. And when you zoom in, you'll lose quality. And try and have good light. It's very hard on the phone to try and bring up the darkness or bring down the light after the fact. Some phones will try and do digital correction as when you're taking the phone photo, but most phones cannot take good photos in low light. Another good tip is to try and fix your exposure or focus. When you're taking a photo, if you hold your finger for a few seconds on the screen, it will lock the focus and the exposure, and then you can raise your finger up or down to make it lighter or darker. So you're not always using the automated artificial intelligence. Zoom with your legs. As much as possible, do not use the zoom on a phone, because you're just zooming within the picture, so it's just getting worse and worse and worse and worse quality. Always zoom with your legs. And then now, these are the rules, but the rules are meant to be broken, but make sure you practice some of these first before you try and master them. So most of these tips and tricks can be used in video as well. When you're thinking about when you're taking a video, especially with your phone. And here is a top view. As I said before, turn the phone on the side. It makes it much easier. And unless you're going to be producing a video that's only ever going to be seen on Twitter or Instagram, then it makes it very, very hard to do anything with the video when you have it in portrait mode. If you take it in landscape mode, it's much easier to be able to use it in other productions and other things that might be used later on. Check the light. As I've said many times in all these tips and tricks, make sure you have good light, and even more so with video, because it's extremely hard to pull up those very dark shadows after. The thing when shooting with a mobile phone, the hardest thing to get is good sound. The microphones are never that good on mobile phones. So the easiest tip and trick I could use is either use an external microphone or have a second phone. Have somebody else standing there with their phone, like a journalist, for instance, and hold out the phone in front of them and record a separate audio. You can always sync the audio and the video together later. And again, have clear messaging. Try not to stumble. This is what we're talking about with your content. Be clear on what you have to say, and don't assume that people know what you're talking about. And as I said many times before, do not zoom, move closer, use your legs, walk up. I know it's very hard when you're in a giant meeting with 1,000 people and you want to get a photo of this person on stage giving their talk. And when you take a photo of them and then you send it to be put on an exposure article, and it's so blurry you can't make out what it is. It would have been so much better if you could just quickly pop down to the front of that room and take a photo. It would get you a much better photo. And then watch your fingers. That one of the rookie mistakes of taking a photo is having your finger accidentally slip in front of the lens. You could get the best photo in the world and your finger's there, and it either makes it blurry or you're covering the microphone, and then it's very hard to fix after. And also keeping it steady. It's worth investing in a very cheap little gimbal to hold onto your phone, or even better as a tripod stand. A little clamp, then you can screw it into a tripod and you can put it there and be very, very steady. And the social media golden rule: never film or say anything you wouldn't want your mum to hear or see. And then I think to get into the social media, I think Kyle will now take over. Thank you very much. If you have any questions, by all means, please put them in the Q&A, and we will try and answer them while other people are talking, or we will do a general session after. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. So my name is Kaya, and I met some of you in Botswana. And for the others, I am working as a comms officer here at GRID-Arendal in Norway. And I'm going to be talking about sharing your content on social media. So the three social media platforms that I'll be talking about today are Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. So when it comes to Facebook, it's really good because it has a high level of interaction with your audience. There's many different ways you can interact with your audience through commenting, liking photos, even messaging on Messenger. Also, you can post videos and photos, not just one, but you can post a whole album of videos, a whole album of photos that you can later share on your other social media channels. And it's also very good for creating events. I'll talk more about Facebook in detail later. When it comes to Twitter, you can have frequent interactions with a very wide audience. And it's also a very good way to be seen and interact with journalists, as many journalists are very frequent users of Twitter. And it's also a great way to easily stay updated on the work of others. And lastly, Instagram is a place where you can share things more casually through stories. It also has, usually, not always, it has a younger audience, and it focuses a lot more on imagery. So now I'm going to go a little bit more into detail on Facebook first. So, first of all, when you start a Facebook page, whether it's for your project, organization, or for yourself, you need to create a name. And it should be a name that's easy to remember and easy to spell. For instance, just simply the name of your organization or your project. It's also important that when you create names on other platforms, they should be the same if that's possible. You should also keep the contact info on your page updated, because then people can easily reach you, whether you list your website or you put a phone number or you put an email address. It's a very good way to engage in more communication with people that can reach you through your Facebook page. You should also write a short and concise bio where people can learn who you are and what you do, but it should be in a few simple sentences. It should not be too elaborate. When it comes to a profile picture, using the logo of your organization or your project is a very good idea. This spreads your logo out there. More people will see it, and then they will think of your project when they see the logo. And also, when they click on your profile picture and enter your page, there will be a cover photo there. And this cover photo, it should be a high resolution photo, good one. It should represent your project or your organization in one way or another. It's a good way to draw people into your profile and see, wow, these guys really are trying to make it look good. So I'm going to have a look at the rest of their stuff. And once you have set up your account, you have to start spreading the word. And a good place to start here is with friends and family, because they just have to like your page anyway. So once you've started to get people to like your page or become friends with people, then you can start interacting with others, either by posting your own content, but also you can like and comment on other people's content. This is a way to get your picture and your name out there, and then hopefully more people will join you and have a look at your profile. Facebook is also, as I mentioned, a very great place to create and to share events. So if you're planning any events, Facebook is a good place to put the information on this, to get people to join your event, to share links, etc., other information relating to your event. And this event can then be shared on other social media sites. So a lot of the stuff you can post on Facebook can generally be used as a base and that you can further share through Twitter or through Instagram. But even though you can post photo albums and video albums on Facebook, it's important to remember that the quality of the photos and videos will decrease on Facebook. So if you have high quality images you want to share, you can use other pages such as Flickr. If you have videos you want to share, you can use, for instance, YouTube or Vimeo. That's very important if you want to keep the quality on your content. And these can obviously also then be shared on Facebook or other pages. And lastly, hashtags are very important. Hashtags it's the hashtag and then a word in one word. And this, if you include this in your post, it will link you to other people that have used the same hashtag. So you can click on the hashtag and then you can look at a list of other people that have talked about the same stuff that you're talking about. So that was a little bit about Facebook. Now I'm just going to give you a little example of a nice Facebook page. This is the Jeff's Facebook. And as you can see, they have used their logo as a profile picture, and they have a beautiful and colorful image as their cover photo. And on the side here, they also have their website, a phone number to get in touch with them. And you can click further into their sites here in the Abouts page. They have a very good definition or explanation on who they are and what they do. So next is Twitter. So as I mentioned, you should try and use the same Twitter name as you have on Facebook and preferably Instagram as well, if you can. It's not always possible, but it's a good way to keep people coming onto your page if it's exactly the same. On Twitter, you should have a short bio and you can include hashtags there. Your bio will be visible, I'll show you afterwards, just under your profile picture on your page. So everybody will be able to see it when they click onto your profile. In your hashtag, in your bio, if it's your personal account, it's a very good idea to include a disclaimer. This is because sometimes you might want to retweet something or talk about something that's not necessarily your organization's point of view, so you should make the distinction that this is your personal point of view. Again, just like on Facebook, you should use your profile picture and cover photos to represent you or your organization, preferably by using a logo or just by using something that is relevant to you. And Twitter is a good place to quickly engage in discussions. You can simply retweet by doing one click, or you can like someone's tweet, or you can reply to it. You can also write your own content, or you can share photos or videos. And the good thing about Twitter is that your post will be small. They have a limited amount of symbols that you can use. So this means that it doesn't take you as long to necessarily to write a post, because it has to be very short and concise. And again, it's very important on Twitter to use hashtags. That's, I would say, more important on Twitter than on Facebook. Hashtags are frequently used, and I'll give you some examples at the end of the presentation. And here is just an example of WWF's Twitter page. As you can see here, they have a nice little bio along with some hashtags, and their profile picture is their logo, and then they've got a campaign as their cover photo, which is good because it shows what they're currently working on and it shows a hashtag. So good way of using their photos. And lastly, I'm going to talk about Instagram. Again, try and use the same name as you have on Twitter and Facebook. In your biography on Instagram, it's a good idea to use emojis. This is because usually Instagram is a bit more casual. It's got a younger audience most of the time. So, and also you view Instagram most of the time on a phone. So it has to be short, it has to be eye-catching. And it can also include what people can expect from your posts. On Instagram, you can't post links to websites unless you do it in your bio. So if you have a website and you want to share that on Instagram, you should leave it in your bio, because then people can click on the link and end up on your website. This cannot happen in comments or posts on Instagram, unfortunately. Again, try and use your logo as a profile picture. Yeah, and also if you have a sort of a theme for your posts, it's a good idea to keep your niche, because this will make sure that your audience sort of understands what you're all about and what they can expect from your account. Another thing is that on Instagram you have stories, and stories are a great way to capture people's attention, but also in a casual way. So it can be less formal than what you post on your wall or on your app. And it's a good way to get people interested in what you're doing. You can bring them along on a field trip, you can bring them along to a meeting. And then after you've posted a story, you can also create highlights on your profile where you can collect many stories from one day or from a theme or from a field trip, and you can collect them in one place so that people can look at what you did during that whole time. There are several different ways to increase your followers on Instagram. First of all, having a niche, like I mentioned, is a very good idea. And even if your niche isn't very specific, you should keep your account focused, both on posted content and in your stories. And a way to keep your content focused and to keep sort of a thread through the whole, through all of your content, is to have specific filters on your images to make them look very similar. That's a nice way to make your Instagram account look interesting for people. You should also post consistently. This is really important for all social media accounts, and you can use tools such as Hootsuite or other tools where you can actually schedule your posts months in advance so that you know exactly what you're going to be posting at different times. Again, here you should engage with the community. You should like people's photos, you should comment on them, and you should reply to comments if other people comment on your stuff. And you should use hashtags. Hashtags are generally really important. But the other thing on Instagram is to use geotags. And geotags are when you say where you are when you're taking a photo, or where you are, where the photo was taken, because that way people can click on the location and then they can go and see where other people, what content other people produce from the same locations. So it's a good way to get more people to see your stuff. And here is an example of an Instagram account. You can see here they have a very nice logo as their photo. They've got a good little bio here with an emoji, some hashtags, and also their website. And here they've created highlights from their different stories. So you can follow what they've been doing, different topics of their content. And also it's a nice and clean, you can't see the rest of their account now, but they've got very good photos, like what Rob was talking about earlier. Yeah, it's important to take nice photos. And lastly, I have some hashtags just to show you some different examples. You can basically use anything as a hashtag. It just cannot contain a symbol within the hashtag. That's very important. So you can either use normal different hashtags just to sort of cover the topic that you're talking about, but you can also use hashtags that might get you featured. So for example, if you're taking beautiful photos about traveling, you can use BBC Travel, and then if BBC Travel finds your photo extremely good looking, then they can maybe retweet your photo or republish it. So it's also another way of getting your content out to the world. If anybody has any questions, please put them in the Q&A, and then we'll try and help you as much as we can. Thank you for listening.
We have one question here.
Yeah.
May I ask how to ensure your personal view is different from your organization's in case of liking photos on social media?
I would just, if you are on your own social media account, then you like stuff from your own social media account, then that will be your view. If you're on your organization's social media account, then I would probably just not like any photos that could raise any issues like that.
And another question is, why is it important to put a disclaimer on your account if it's very clear that it's a personal account?
For instance, on my Twitter account, in my bio, I've said that I work at GRID. But that does not necessarily mean that I represent everything that GRID represents. So for me, I've just put a disclaimer because then people know that the stuff that I tweet is not related to my work, which is also included in my bio.
I'll chime in a little bit also on that question. I wrote an answer to that in the Q&A part, but another thing is if you like to comment on politics in your Twitter feed, your organization might not want to be associated with that. So I know, I've worked for organizations in the past where by law, they're not allowed to get involved in politics. So if I want to say that I like a certain candidate or I don't like a certain one, I definitely want everyone to know that I'm only representing myself and I'm not speaking for my employer when I say things like that.
And then someone else has asked, what about paid internships on Instagram and boosted posts on Facebook?
Oh, so paying to boost your content on social media.
Yeah, that's if you have the
should it be done? Should it be done?
Yeah, if you have the resources for that and you think that you can have a good or a better outcome if you spread your word more on Instagram or on Facebook, then it can be a good solution. Just depends on who your target audience is and what you want to get out of the post.
How long can the text be on Facebook?
I mean, I think your posts on Facebook will last indefinitely. They'll, as you publish new ones, they get posted down.
How many words?
Yeah, how many words?
Oh,
is there a limit?
I don't know if there's a limit.
I think it can be really long
Yeah.
if you want. Yeah. Let's see.
And what about your views on paying to get more followers on Twitter?
I mean, there's been some controversy over that. I know the New York Times, for instance, did a big expose on that a year or two ago and found that a lot of people had bought a lot of their followers and exposed that, and it became sort of embarrassing for them. I mean, I think it's better to try and earn your followers. And honestly, if you have money to invest, you might be better off paying to boost Facebook posts and try to reach more people, or do things like that rather than paying to buy Twitter followers.
Yeah.
And then there's one question for Lisa. Do you think that somebody has a nice story about storytelling about water in Africa in the context of scarcity and water stress? What angle should they take?
Oh, I mean, that's a good question. My first, without knowing a lot about the particular situation, my first idea is like find one individual whose life has been affected by water scarcity. What does that mean to them? How does it make their life more difficult, and what would help them, and what is your group doing, or what are you investigating that might help them? So again, I think that's a great place where bringing in a person, a character, can really help to tell that story. I mean, one thing that I think is worth emphasizing, and I think this relates to the presentations that all three of us made, is you might be trying to reach a policymaker or a scientist, and maybe you think, oh, they're serious people, they only want to see data, they only want to see numbers, they only want to see dry and serious things. But in fact, policymakers are people too, and just like the rest of us, they are bombarded with information. If you want to get their attention, all of these techniques that we've been talking about, they work for all different kinds of people. So policymakers are also they're also swayed by emotion, and they're also want to know how things that you're working on affect real people, or how things that they might do would affect real people. And they're drawn in by good imagery or by clever wording, or just like everybody else is. So I think these kinds of techniques that we've been talking about really can be used in all different kinds of communications. I mean, obviously, you'll adapt them to some extent, but everybody likes a good story. Everybody likes a good image or some clever targeted wording, and that can get you a long way in a lot of different contexts.
Also had one question about taking photos at events, particularly when you're looking at moving targets in speeches, presentations, and performances. I'm assuming when you're talking about this, you're thinking about when there's low light, because obviously at events, it wouldn't be a very bright light. And the problem with cameras, especially when you have them on automatic, they will use a very long shutter speed. So if things are moving around, then that's why you end up with a blurry photo. So the best course of action is to increase the ISO instead, the speed of the film, whether it's on a SLR or if you're using a phone camera, then to install a third-party application, something like Camera Pro or Filmic Pro, where you can actually take control of the ISO and the speed of the film. And then you should end up, but then you have to be very wary that sometimes when you speed up the speed of the film to a higher ISO, the picture will be much more grainy. And then someone else asked, are the quality of photos and videos taken on phones good enough for publications? Again, as long as you haven't zoomed in, it should be good enough. Sometimes it's worth installing a third-party app on your phone. Unfortunately, they do cost money, and then you get much more control over the photo, and you can then also shoot in RAW. But then one of the downsides of shooting in RAW, which I didn't mention earlier, is that they are much bigger file sizes. So if you don't have much space on your phone, you can be limited in that way. Social media graphics. Do you see that question? Yeah. Do you have any tips on, is it a Canva?
Canva is easy to use. If you know how to make things, then obviously using Photoshop and Illustrator and those things would also be very good. But Canva is easier to use if you don't really have a lot of knowledge on these different types of software.
And someone has obviously pointed out the obvious. We're not talking about YouTube or Vimeo when we're talking about social media networks. Yes, there's YouTube, there's Vimeo, there's Flickr, and these are also content based, and I think the same rules apply when if you follow the same rules in writing a story as to producing a story, whether it's on a photo or a video, it should give the same results. Is that true? And the question was asked by Papa from ANBO. Thank you very much. What else do we have here? I noticed that we've just answered that one. I'm sorry, I'm just flicking through. We're running close to the end of our time, so I'm just trying to. We can also send answers to these questions. We can quickly
go through some of them. One. Time of posting, that's a very good one, because the problem is that the time is not the same around the world. So what I usually try and do when I schedule posts is to try and include as many people as possible in sort of the time period. So if you think of when you're sitting on your computer or on your phone, try and think of when most of the world will be awake that this is relevant to. But that's a very difficult question to answer. Depends. Instagram versus Twitter versus Facebook. That's also difficult. Instagram, I would say, is very good for general posting about who your organization is, what kind of stuff you produce. Not necessarily specific for events and stuff, although you could use it for that. But also you need to keep in mind that Instagram usually has a younger audience. Twitter and Facebook, you can use more frequently. Facebook is good for events, interacting with the community. It just depends on who your audience is really and what you're trying to get out of your posts, basically.
And there's one here for Lisa, I think.
Yeah, so I'll read this question. Someone asks, as a communication practitioner working with highly technical people, like scientists and program managers who like so many hard facts included in stories or reports, do you have any tips on how I can introduce or in a way sway them or make them understand the storytelling type of writing for our audiences? So I would say, trust yourself. If you know your audience and you know what they want, then go ahead and give them that. I mean, the guidelines that we're laying out here are pretty general, and you definitely need to adapt them to your own circumstances. I guess one tip that I might give for that is sometimes when we are aiming at practitioners or policymakers, we might give them a large document with a whole lot of stuff in it. Maybe you want to break that down into some either shorter stories that have a lot of facts, but just choose one section. So you're just focusing on one subcategory or one specific area to give them information on. So you can get them to focus on that one thing, even though you have a lot of information on other things. Choose your moment when you want to push a certain message.
I have a question here asking that the focus has been mainly on phones and not about professional cameras. A lot of the composition techniques I was talking about, they can be used on any cameras, whether it's an DSLR or a digital camera or a film camera. The composition techniques are exactly the same. I've just focused on phones because we are mostly talking about the Jeff International Waters community and how they submit photos to their blogs, to their stories, to their news items and things like that. So I'm just using feedback that we receive from people on the fact that they're using phones mostly. Anything else here we can? I'm sorry, I'm just flicking through. Do you think that research-based projects should have a Facebook, Instagram account, given that these are more targeted to the general public?
Yeah.
How would you make your posts interesting?
Well, I think that research-based projects could very easily have Facebook and Instagram accounts. And when it comes to how to make your post interesting, it relates a lot to what Lisa was talking about, how to kind of exclude the acronyms, decrease the number of stats you're using, and try and make it more of a story. Even though it's a post, it can still be about a specific area, about a person, about an animal, just try and make content that will appeal to someone who does not have a scientific background. It's hard to sort of tell you exactly what to do because I don't know exactly the topics, but the point is just to, maybe you have something to add to.
Yeah, I mean, I think this can come back to knowing your audience. If you have the sense that your audience, the people you want to reach, are not really spending time on Facebook or Instagram, maybe that's not where you put your effort. Maybe you put it somewhere else. But oftentimes I think there are still communities of scientific people who do pay attention to some things on Facebook, who do spend some time on Twitter talking to each other. So that's kind of a matter of knowing your audience.
And then there's a question about placing the same content in all 3 social networks. And I don't think that's necessary. You have to remember that you will probably have different audiences in the different platforms. So try and shape your content towards the different audiences, which probably most of the time would mean to change the content of the different networks as well.
I have a question here about indicating some of the best brands of cameras to take photos, but I think there's most cameras take pretty good photos, and I think it just depends on your budget, and also most of us are environmental organizations, so try and use what you've got. I'm not going to advocate for keep going out and buying new cameras, and sometimes it just comes down to composition and how to take the photo and how to edit the photo. Necessarily, you can get a good photo from a bad camera.
Yeah.
So I think we're coming to a close here. If you see on the presentation there, our contact details are there. It's grid-no/our first name, and all of our contact details are on that webpage. Or you can contact us through the IW Learn webpage. But thank you all for joining. Until next time.
Yeah, good to talk to you all. Bye. Thanks.
Bye. And don't forget, if you want to watch this again and again and again, you can watch it on YouTube. Cheers. Bye.